Okay, so I think we're going to start Sif Bez base today, um, because we've sort of gone through a lot of different stuff in Sif Aleph as far as the laws of Nezek. There's still a lot of gray area left that we don't have clarity on, like, for example, how to assess the amount of damage. We saw different ways of calculating that. We also know that there's all different levels of grama, of causative damage, and that has to be assessed by a beis din if there's perhaps a question. We also talked about dinei shamayim versus dinei adam, that a person should, even when he knows that he's putter, dinei adam, he should strive to fulfill his dinei shamayim. So those are the three major issues that we saw. Let's take a look at Sif Beis, where we're going to get further discussion. Vafilu im bahanezek alav, asur lisalkome alav, im al yedeze yigrom sheyavo al chavero. So here's another important aspect of the halacha. Even if you know that damage is coming to you, or you are currently being damaged, and you seek to alleviate the damage from yourself, you would not be allowed to do that if by diverting the damage from yourself, you are causing someone else to be damaged. Okay? And we'll give some examples of this. Because you're not allowed to save yourself from personal injury or damage if in the process you are causing injury or damage to somebody else. Now, we'll see that there's obviously exceptions to this. If you can save your life by damaging someone else's property, you're allowed to. Aval kodem sheba hanezek alav mutar lidchoso shelo yavo alav. He says, but there is an exception. He says that before the damage hits you, and you see the damage about to come to you, you're allowed to divert it so that and by through that diversion, it's going to befall somebody else. So what's an example of that? Kagon amas hamayim haba lishtov sadehu. So let's say there's a flash flood. A flash flood is coming. Basically, some kind of stream of water, with a powerful stream of water, is on its way, and it's imminently going to be striking your field. So ad shelo nichnasa l'sadehu mutar ligdor bifaneha afal pi shal yedei zehi shotefes sadei chavera. He says, so if it hasn't yet hit your field, right, and you just want to create a barrier, want to put up sandbags to prevent the water from hitting your property. So you're allowed to do that so long as the water hasn't come yet onto your property. Okay, so you can put up sandbags to block the water from hitting your property. The only problem is that by putting up sandbags on your property, you're going to cause the water to divert to your neighbors. So that you are allowed to do. But but if it already has come onto your property, the flood, and you want to pump the water out, but the outtake of the pump is going onto your neighbor's property, that you're not allowed to do. So to divert the water when it's already on your property to your neighbor's property, you cannot do. So David Vodianoy, I'm just thinking, like, there's so many issues in construction where this is probably a relevant issue. Let's say you live in a house, and what you want to do is you want to create an eaves trough so that it'll divert the water away from your house. But by diverting it away from your house, it's going to fall onto your neighbor's property, right? So halachically, you're not allowed to do that because it's already once the water comes on your property, you're not allowed to divert it to go onto your neighbor's property. But what you are allowed to do is you are allowed to construct your home in such a way such that if there would be a flood, it would run off and it would not hit your house. You can build the area that's on your property, put it on an incline to prevent the water from flooding your house, even if by building that incline, it's going to run off to your neighbor's house. And I suppose that the argument would be that your neighbor has the ability to do the same. Your neighbor can also build his property on an incline so that it lands somewhere in between the two properties.
So there's a bylaw for this.
What's that?
There are bylaws to control rainwater, and that's by means of a swale. Everybody's supposed to contain their own water and drain it away from your property. Now, a lot of times, due to settlement and due to people deciding that they want to put a walkway, on the side, are not aware of the bylaw, and sometimes it creates machloket between neighbors. Like, your water is going into my water, it freezes my walkway and whatnot. But there are bylaws governing water management around the house.
There you go. Okay. But the one thing that's clear is that once it's already on your property, you're not allowed to remove it in such a way that it's going to cause your neighbor damage. Shekevin shemutal hanezek alav, because once the damage is already your responsibility because it's on your property, eino rashai l'salko me alav u'lahatilo al chavero. You don't have a right to remove it from your property so that it goes onto your neighbor's property. That you don't have a right to do. And I'm not really sure if building on an incline would even be legal according to halacha, because technically it's reached your property first, and then it slides off your property and onto your neighbors. That might not be permitted halachically. I'm just thinking, what you'd probably have to do is that's probably not going to be an okay scenario in halacha. Once it's on your property, you don't have a right to cause it to divert now to your neighbor. So,
not clear. Are we distinguishing between whether the water is physically there or it will fall, and when it falls, it'll be there?
It seems that we're distinguishing between whether it's physically on your property or not.
So, if you build your home before it starts raining, or the structure, whatever it is, then it's not there yet. And when it rains, then it runs off.
Yeah, but once it's on your property, by you having it run off your property, you're sort of diverting it from your property over to your neighbor. So
even if you build the structure before the rain comes.
Yeah. I mean, let's say you build an eaves trough in such a way that before it rains, you build your eaves trough, but the rainwater runs off over onto your neighbor's roof, okay, or onto your neighbor's yard. So you could say, well, what did I do? I built it before it rained, right? But that's not going to fly. That's not going to fly.
I guess it's a psikresha, right? That it will for sure go onto the neighbor's property.
I mean, look, all I see is the criteria is that once it's on your property, once it hits your eaves trough and the water's on your property, to cause it now to divert over to your neighbor is usher. You can block it from ever coming to your property. You can prevent it from coming onto your property. But once it hits your property, it's your problem. You can't divert it now to your neighbor.
Can we come up with an example of how you'd prevent it from getting to your property without diverting it? Because I'm trying to think of this.
Sure. If there's a place that's hefker, that's not your property and it's not your neighbor's property. And let's say you live on the beach, right? And you want to put up sandbags to prevent the coastline from coming onto your, from washing onto your property. I mean, I grew up in California where this was a real issue. that you would, some people, people in Malibu, for example, that live right on the beach, if there was high tides, they would put up sandbags, and this is probably happens in Florida as well. They'd put up sandbags in order to block the tide from hitting their property. If they would say there was a storm coming, let's say, so you can do that, right? Provided that provided that it's not going to hit your property first, and then you cause it then afterwards to go onto your neighbor's property. So that would be a scenario. Now, I don't know what kind of scenario there would be between two neighbors who live in Thornhill. You know, I don't know that it's mutter to build, let's say, the walkway on an incline, so that as soon as the rain hits your walkway, it flows over to your neighbor's property. David and I are familiar with the case because we discussed the case before, where there was a real dispute between two neighbors. Both of them are members of the shul, and the complaint was from one neighbor to another is that all the water is flowing off of your eaves trough onto my property because your walkway is built on an incline. The water falls onto your property and then flows onto mine, creates a bed of ice, a sheet of ice, and it's slippery, and we're going to kill ourselves because we're going to slip on the ice. That was the complaint, right? And so what David had pointed out is that there were problems with one of the neighbors' eaves trough, but it was something that was fairly common in the neighborhood, that people's houses were built this way, and there wasn't that unless you actually took it up with the city, it was going to be very hard to fight the fight. But I guess what was the conclusion, David? I don't remember anymore.
Unfortunately, I mean, we came up with a solution that had a small amount that needed to be paid, but as of today, nothing has been done. Unfortunately, it's one of these situations that I don't know. It's I guess the water is a big problem, but might be a little bit a few more underlying issues there.
Right. Okay. Anyway, so this is halacha l'maisa. All right. So let's take a look now at some of the Imrei Yaakov over here. Get some clarity on the scenario. So asur l'salko, you're not allowed to remove damage from yourself. If by removing damage from yourself, you're dumping the damage onto somebody else. But at the same time, kaimalon de rodef shahir rodef acher chaver lahargo. B'shiber hanirdaf kelim shel adam acher chayav. We paskin that if a person is escaping from a rodef is any person that you see is trying to pursue you to kill you. So you have an obligation to save yourself, right? You can't just let someone come after you and kill you. You have an obligation to save yourself. In the course of running away, you end up damaging someone else's property. So you can just imagine, a scene in an adventure movie where a guy is running through the marketplace trying to escape the hired killers, and in the course of running through the marketplace, he smashes a cart load of goods. So the halacha is that the person, once he saves himself, he was allowed to damage other people's property in order to save himself, but he has to pay for the damage that he caused. Okay, and I think we spoke about this before. Shahamatzil atzmo b'mamon chavero chayav, because if you save your life, and in the course of saving your life, you damage someone else's property, you have to make compensation. You have to compensate whatever damage you caused. So, let's say you're in a chase scene where the mafia is after you, and and you're driving through the streets and you end up crashing through someone's car and stuff like that. So you have to pay for the damages, right? You're justified in saving your life, but you still have to pay for the damage. Okay, l'salko me'olav. So you're not allowed to divert the damage from yourself and put it onto somebody else. So here's another example. Im hamalchus mevakeshes lahapil bet o gimel batim shehem b'choima la'asos se'ir perutza. He says, let's say the government is doing a major urban renewal, and the city has a wall around it, and the government of the city government has decided that they need to demolish 2 or 3 homes in order to create a new opening in the wall of the city, okay, or to build a new road or whatever the situation is. The imkvar nigzar al bayis ploni. So if the government had already designated your house for demolition, because based on the city plans, they've already identified which houses need to be demolished. Asr lihishtadel ki al yedei yagia nezek lechavero. You're not allowed to go back to the city planners and say, why don't you divert your new road and put it somewhere else? There's this word NIMBY. What does NIMBY mean? Anyone know what that means?
Not in my backyard or something like that?
Right, not in my backyard, right? So everyone, that's what happened with that big highway that they had started to build with the Allen Expressway, right? What happened with the
Spadina Expressway?
Yeah,
that's what it was called.
It was called the Spadina Expressway?
It was going to be called the Spadina Expressway because it was going to be going all the way down to Spadina, and then they stopped it.
Right, because basically some very wealthy people in Forest Hill said, NIMBY, not in my backyard.
So it's an expressway that goes nowhere.
That's right. And it creates a huge, there's probably been billions of dollars of revenue lost, collectively by people who have spent hours on the Allen Expressway, just waiting to get off at Eglinton. And to me, it was one of those absurdities of Toronto that I discovered when I moved here. What is this all about? It doesn't make any sense. And someone explained it to me. Oh, it's because the neighbors stopped it from moving forward. And it still doesn't make sense. I mean, I guess people are too polite, but at some point you have to do what's for the benefit of the entire city, for the city infrastructure, more than what's in the interests of a few neighbors who are vocal enough to lodge complaints. So we're not going to solve that today, but it's one of those things that these neighbors got together as a block and said, not in my backyard, even after the highway was already planned. And they're basically causing creating a tremendous traffic burden on the rest of the city who need to commute to work and need to use this as a major artery that needs to be accessed. So you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to have the city basically go somewhere else. Not in my backyard. But it has to be demonstrable damage, that by you stopping the city from knocking down your house, that they're definitely going to knock down somebody else's house. So it could be that in the case of the Allen Expressway, the Forest Hills neighbors got together and they did the right thing, because they basically said, I'm not interested in having this traffic disrupt my quality of life and create noise and create congestion in my neighborhood. But what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is there may be builds up of traffic in other places, but is it definitely going to cause damage? Well, it's not exactly identifiable, the damage. It may be an intangible damage, or it may be a cumulative effect, over the course of time. So that's why he says, V'davka b'nezek vadayu varur. We're going to see in the next couple of seifim that you have to be able to say definitively and concretely that there's a specific damage that is caused to a specific entity. And if that's difficult to identify, then you are allowed to say NIMBY, not in my backyard. Sorry, did someone want to step in at some point? Okay.
You brought it up already, that the blockage isn't going to be at Eglinton, so it'll be at St. Clair, or it'll be at wherever it stops. Because nobody's going from up here to Lawrence necessarily to go to work.
Right.
Few people, but
right. So it sounds like it has to. It sounds like you would be in your rights to say not in my backyard if you cannot point to a very, very specific damage that's going to be caused. And we have NIMBY all over the world. I mean, even in Thornhill, when Ryokan wanted to develop Sobeys Plaza, so a group of neighbors got together and said, NIMBY, we don't want the added traffic congestion. But what's going to happen if you don't allow us to build this? So there's going to be a housing shortage, and housing prices are going to skyrocket because there's not enough houses. So, well, yeah, that's true. The prices in your homes may go up, but that's not a tangible, identifiable injury to one specific party. As a matter of fact, some people may capitalize on that. So that's not something that you can basically point to and say, oh, there's clear and present damage to somebody else. Okay. Asr lahotzio. So you're not allowed to remove the injury from your property and put it on someone else's property. Nira de dafka lahotzio. So here, this is an important statement from the Imrei Yaakov. It says it's only that you're not allowed to remove it from your property and dump it on your neighbor. Aval shari ligdor bifaneha shelo tamshich lihikanes yoter lifnim. But what you are allowed to do is to create, even on your own property, you can put up a fence or put up some kind of barricade or blockade to prevent it from coming further onto your property. Even though by doing so, you are causing the damage to be brought on your neighbor. So that actually turns it on its ear. And where does he get this from? So he just says, "Kain nira lanius daiti." He says, "This is my opinion." He's not even pointing to any specific source, but he says, "Take a look at the Pischei Choshen, Perik Yud Beis Sifkatan Samech Beis." And what we'll do is, Amir Tzashem, maybe tomorrow, we'll take a look at that source, at the Pischei Choshen, because I have the Pischei Choshen on my hard drive, and we'll be able to take a look and see what that argument is. But this is a real case. In other words, I want to create some kind of slope or some kind of barricade on my property to prevent the water from, let's say, hitting the walls of my house. But by doing that, the water is going to be diverted onto my neighbor's property. So there's got to be a point where we create a division and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Because here the Imrei Yaakov is saying that it would be okay to let the water, block the water from coming on your house. But by doing that, it's going to accumulate on your neighbor's property. He says that seems that it would be okay, provided that the neighbor has the opportunity. I would add the caveat, provided that the neighbor has the same opportunity. In other words, if both of you were to build the proper kind of structures on your properties, such that the water is prevented from hitting the walls of your house, and it collects right in the middle between your two houses, that would be okay. The other neighbor, doesn't want to spend the money to build that structure on his property, and you do want to spend the money. So that's where the Imrei Yaakov is saying, you're allowed to build something that will prevent the water or block the water from hitting the wall of your house, even if by doing so, it's going to run off. And if your neighbor could build a similar structure on his property, the water will get trapped in between the two houses. Just because he refuses to build that structure on his property doesn't make you liable because he should have taken the proper precautions. So this is an interesting qualification as well. So it would seem like to build a slope so that your walkway slopes away from your house is okay, provided that your neighbor can also build his walkway sloping away from his house, so that eventually you get to basically you have a V between the two properties so that the water gets trapped in between. Let's say your neighbor fails to, and you have a slope so that the water slopes away from your house and his walkway is flat. Well, in that case, the water that slopes away from your house is going to end up hitting the walls of his house. So he says, hey, how can you do that? So you say to him, well, you just do what I did. Bolster your walkway so that it's on a slope so that the water will collect and it won't hit either house. And if he refuses to do that, he can't have any recriminations against you just because you're protecting the wall of your house from being hit with water. So David, is that what the city ordinance is basically?
That's exactly what the concept is, what you just described. And initially, when we went to that situation with our two members, one side decided to put a walkway that took the water away from their house and hit the other neighbor's house head on. That exacerbated the problem, made it worse. But again, I don't think anybody called city officials on it yet, and that would probably put more fuel on the fire once that happens. But that's exactly the idea. There should be a common swale between the two houses. But again, when you're getting into older houses, before there were bylaws and something like this, and you're building a new house and the house beside you is an old one that's in non-compliance, you have to retain your own water as you're building your own house, i.e. you have to create a depression on your property that will take your water away towards the street or to the backyard or whatever. But the neighbor with the old house is protected by law that the new house's water will not drain on his property.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Rabbi, can I just bring up a scenario that we're dealing with right now at our house? It's a little bit different from what we're talking about the water, but it's also where sort of damage is happening to our property. So we have a neighbor who has this big sort of van type of truck that's parked right at the edge of the property, actually even a touch going over onto our property. And what's happened is because it's parked there, it's creating a whole big sort of shadow that is sort of killing our grass. And this type of scenario can also happen maybe where somebody has, let's say, a bungalow, maybe not in our area, and then a big monster home goes next door and creates a whole sort of shadow where they never get sunlight, let's say, on that house now. Is that considered a damage from the neighbor?
Sure. It's called hezek re'iyah. If he blocks your view, you can stop a person from building something on his property that will block sunlight from hitting your property. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we looked at, we've been in the process of looking at developing our parking lot in the shul by perhaps putting up some housing, as a possibility. And in speaking to the architects that we were working with, that's one of actually when they design housing, they also take into account the shadow that their building is going to project. And they now have software that actually calculates at different times of the day the shadow that the building is going to cast all around the surrounding area. And they can actually show you, this is what the shadow will look like at 10 a.m. This is what the shadow will look like at 4 p.m. And it's fascinating that this software is very sophisticated, and there are bylaws about it. And David can perhaps speak to it more, but there are laws that actually dictate that when you put up a new structure, you have to make sure that the shading is not going to be an obstruction for your neighbor. So maybe we'll lead in with that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. David, you'll prepare a little, give us a little presentation tomorrow about those rules as well. Okay.
Fascinating.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.